Welcome. Come on in, get comfortable. Once you get in and get settled, find that chat box. That's where you'll put all your comments and questions throughout the presentation. And to get us started, you can put in where you're viewing from. Who are you and where are you viewing us from? We have more people joining. Welcome, welcome. If you just popped in, go ahead and find that chat box. Let us know where you're viewing from. And that's also where you'll put your questions and comments. We're excited you're here. We will get started shortly. Welcome, everyone. All right, I have us right on time. Welcome. Again, if you just logged in, find the chat box, let us know where you're viewing from, put your questions, comments, give us some kudos, whatever you want to do there, and we will definitely look at those at the end. We would like to welcome you to Kalogon Presents. Today's presentation is on considerations in seating. There's so many things that factor in. So we have an expert, Brenda Mahon, and she's going to fill us in on all the tips and tricks of the trade when you're considering seating for someone. She has 26 years experience providing occupational therapy services to older adults in a variety of settings. She has extensive experience in seating and positioning in the long-term care setting and is passionate about seating and positioning due to the importance of providing comfort, optimal postural alignment, because she cares about those living an active seated life like we do at Kalogon. She wants to be able to provide them comfort and the ability to do all of those activities of daily living that are important to them. She currently is the education manager, clinical education manager for Broda, a seating company. So now let's get right to it and hear from Brenda. Welcome, Brenda.
Hi, nice to be here.
I want to tell the audience that I have actually attended some of your chats before and learned so much. So we wanted to bring you on with Kalogon because each month we try to really hone in on education and educating others. And our viewers, just to let you know, our viewers are usually people living an active seated life, those caring for someone else, lots of clinicians looking for tidbits and tools and tips so they can help others. And we also have engineers and developers and researchers that are always going the extra mile to help people. So you fit right in there because you live every day to help others as well. So I did read your bio to everyone, but tell us a little bit about what you do daily.
So I'm the clinical education manager for Broda, and I was a big fan of Broda for since I've been working in long-term care, which is about 25 years or so. So I was always a big fan because I saw the difference that it made in people's lives, and I've always been a big fan of seating and positioning. Ironically, I was the reason I got into seating and positioning was when I first graduated as an OTA. I was an OTA before I was an OT. I worked at a level 1 trauma center that had in New York that had a behavioral health unit, a 180 bed, I think it was like 180 bed skilled facility that had a vent unit, and we had a jail on the property. We had a I don't know if I mentioned behavioral health, but so it was a big
A
campus.
wide range for a campus.
Yeah, it was a big campus. And when I first started, I was hired for the skilled nursing facility, which was, my love. I love geriatrics, but at some point in time, we had a new director took over the whole hospital system for therapy and wanted us all to be cross-trained. So that was like a really cool thing. So the good news is that's great as a new grad. Like that's a great thing to be able to do because you get a lot of exposure to a lot of things, but it's also like a blessing and a curse. A lot of OTs, we had a lot of new grad OTs, because let's face it, a lot of people are drawn to that kind of environment after graduating, because they want to have a well-rounded foundation so that they can go out and pursue other opportunities later, if that's, because a lot of people don't stay. We had some that did, but so the funny thing about that is, since we had a lot of new grads cycling through there, no one wanted to do seating and positioning. So it actually, they're like, let's give it to the CODA. So they tasked me with, oh, well, guess what? We have a great opportunity for you. You're going to handle the seating and positioning clinic, which for the skilled facility. So of course, I didn't know anything about seating and positioning. I just graduated. I was lucky. I had a really good vendor at that time. I believe he was an ATP, but it's been a while, so I don't remember. But he was great, and he taught me a lot. And the exciting thing about it was, after doing it for a while, even though I was really intimidated and didn't know anything about it, they did a lot of power mobility. And I had a few patients in the hospital that were your textbook spinal cord injury. So what I mean by that is, they were males above the age of 18, right, who had like high risk injury behaviors, whatever. There was gunshot, gang members, there was car accidents, and a variety of things. So 4 in particular, I had in mind when I first started going to see them in their rooms. Their rooms were dark. It was right post injury, and they would throw me out of the room, use a few choice words, get me out of there. And I kept coming back, because that's who I am, and I don't take any of that personally. And because I worked for the system, I actually got to work in the acute trauma part, and I would also work in the nursing home, and sometimes both in the same day. So the cool thing back then was, since it was a county run facility, those patients would actually come to us because they had nowhere else to go, right? And so now, let's say I'm getting people like between 18 and 21, which is usually frowned on as skilled facility. But I was their first exposure to getting them power mobility, and I really didn't know a lot about it. But that's the thing that drew me into seating and positioning, and how important it is, was because I got to see what a difference it made in these 4 men's lives. And they went from like cursing me out, throwing me out of the room, to like really wanting therapy. And it changed all 4 of their lives. And it was just amazing. So that got me hooked. So that showed me like all the difference it makes.
You've said so many great things already, especially if I'm a new clinician or newer to seating and positioning, because yes, it's intimidating. You're learning something. You weren't just learning something new, like a new program or a new specialty area. You're learning it as a new grad in all these different settings in one campus. So what would you tell somebody, real quick, I usually do this at the end, but what would you tell somebody that may find themselves in that position or interviewing for a job where they know they're going to be the one thrown into this?
If they know that, well, hopefully, I think you really have to have an interest in it at the very least. Like, even though I was intimidated, I definitely had an interest in it. It wasn't something I was like, oh God. It was more like, oh boy, I was scared because I didn't want to do the wrong thing. So I think finding the resources and finding people that, and I always say this when it comes to seating and positioning, if you don't know the answers, and if you're not the most qualified person in your facility, then find out who is. And if this is something you're interested in, then you learn from them. If it's not, then you give it to the people that it is in their wheelhouse. Right. Because I've seen a lot of what happens when that doesn't occur too. So I think, and now there's so many great ATP, like assistive technology professional positions. I just recently received my ATP. Yeah. And a lot of studying, extra studying and stuff. But I think it's a fabulous opportunity for a lot of PTs and OTs that if they're interested in seating and positioning, or if they're interested in assistive technology, because a lot of people work in, different settings. And, I just think it's a great area to specialize in.
I'm sure starting out, you realized right away, the first thing you learned probably was there's not one recipe. So tell us kind of not step by step, but kind of the steps where you started with those 4 gentlemen you worked with.
Well, I found somebody who had the experience. I called around. I actually, because I was really invested, I wanted to, once I talked to them about like maybe power mobility, then I actually saw some interest. So I located the vendor for our area. It was a little different back then, like I said, over 20 years ago, but I found a really good ATP vendor that, and I looked for a manufacturer that provided trials. Now, I know for power mobility, and that still occurs, but it's really important to know if this is something feasible or not. And I think it's fair to start there. Like, and you have to understand the insurance a little bit too to know if it's possible, because now, if someone's in a skilled facility, power mobility is not, a lot of states do not pay for that anymore.
Right.
So that's another thing you really need to know, you know. Depending on what kind of device that you're getting for somebody. So those are things to know. So the first thing you want to know is about funding, right? Because we have to know what to let the client know what's possible for them. And I don't think it's fair. I mean, it's sure we don't totally know. We'll never totally know until we get it together, you know, try to get an order and see what the situation is. But that's like one of the first things you really need to know, because you don't want to hype somebody up on something that might not be possible for them. So so that's important, because that's changed a lot. You know, a lot of states will not cover power mobility in a skilled facility anymore. So again, like I said, there has to be somebody who get somebody who's knowledgeable. And whether it's power or whether it's manual, if you have something in mind and you're based on what the client's goals are, because that's really important, we want to see what they look like in that equipment to see if this is really what, you know, is best for them. So again, finding someone who will be able to trial something is a really great way to go.
And again, trial something that's within the budgetary concerns that you were saying first too. You know, they may let us trial the Cadillac version, but
right.
if that's not the option that we need to be working with, or look, maybe there are grants or funding we can, but knowing all that ahead of time, I think that was a very good point.
And depending on diagnosis, sometimes there are some organizations that have lending closets. Like I've had a lot of experience with the ALS society, especially when I worked in New Jersey. I think the local lending closet was actually in Philadelphia. If they had something, you would call them up. They would put you on the list and they'd send it to you for your client. As a clinician, I've had feeding equipment, I've had wheelchairs sent to the facilities that I've worked at. And the only thing they ask is that when you're done and that person no longer needs that equipment, if you would, you know, get a label from them and ship it back. Perfect. So MS Society too will help some patients pay for certain seating and mobility devices. Like you won't know unless you ask. So that's always something to investigate for sure. And know about all, you know, be a good resource person for your area. Wherever you live, you got to find out the ins and outs. So.
And that's from researching, asking, immersing yourself into it. And that's really how, like you said, you got hooked. You saw results. Yep. You did all this legwork, saw results. And now this many years later, you're still helping people and educating others, which I think is very important too, because out of school, I didn't know where to start. I wanted to help these people, but this is the chair you got. This is what we have. And that's all. No, that's not. There's so many things just within the setting that I could find and use and utilize. And then as I learned, I was able to grow. And I also was a big fan of Broda. I love how far the equipment's come. I love that now there's cushions like the Orbiter. There's different devices even now than there were 10 years ago when I was treating. So it is evolving, but knowing that there's so many different things to try, it's not a one recipe. It's not one-stop shopping for our clients, for our patients. I think that takes the research and speaking with people like you, experts in the field.
Well, you know what's funny? Since you bring up recipe, I was just talking about this the other day, because a lot of people do reach out to me, and I encourage people to reach out, whether it's about our equipment or not, if it's just a general seating especially if it's regarding long-term care or somebody really complex, if they need assistance, I'm always happy to, to share knowledge. But I did say this, I've said this many times, like, and because I've been guilty of it myself. I think a lot of therapists, not only therapists, nurses, like a lot of people in the healthcare arena really are always looking for a recipe. They are. They're looking for like the magic tilt and recline number for someone not to get a pressure injury or the cushion. And there's no such thing because everybody is different. Everybody has different comorbidities. They have different life experiences that they bring to the table. So there really isn't. There's things that, like, based on the information that you get or you have, that you can try first. You can make your best educated guess, but what works for Mrs. Jones isn't going to always work for Mr. Smith. So, yeah, just
You
knowing
didn't
like
even
the basics.
realize it, but you just led us into my next thing I wanted to discuss with you, consideration. So we talk a lot during these educational webinars on different things that you can choose from, but I think something that we miss sometimes are all the different considerations that someone new or a caregiver or the person living the active seated life, they might not think of when they're choosing equipment. So if you can bring up some of those considerations.
So especially if you're talking about someone that needs a chair for themselves, the end user, or their family members. And I get this question a lot at shows, like trade shows, because I support the sales team at trade shows a lot. And I like when people come to me and ask me like, oh, my mother-in-law really needs a chair and, what should I do? And I always ask a little bit about them if they want to share, but it's really important. The one thing I always say is you can't just rely on your doctor. Your doctor has to give you the face-to-face and give you the prescription, especially if you're going to purchase something. Like if you don't, if you're using it through insurance, you have to have a prescription anyway. So like if you're Medicare A or your and your secondary are going to be paying towards the equipment, you want to make sure that you go to a doctor, you get the prescription. But you also want to make sure you involve someone who is knowledgeable about seating. So either a therapist that has some good, and not every therapist is knowledgeable about seating, let's face it, because I've seen enough standard sling seat wheelchairs under people that have neurological comorbidities. And it's a sin. Like that should never happen, right? They should never be in those chairs. As far as I'm concerned, the only people that should be in a sling seat type situation are really people that are using it for transport, that are able to weight shift, and that are still mobile, but maybe they need it for distance,
And
right?
it's temporary, yes.
Yeah. So that's the real important thing that they understand first, is that the doctor doesn't order it for you unless he's a physiatrist and this is what he does, right? But still, you would hope that there'd be a therapist on board. An ATP, if you can, that'd be great. Like if you have an ATP and a therapist. And the reason being, you want to get something not for just now, but you want to get something for like 5 years down the road. 5 years is the Medicare magic number they always throw out there, that, most people aren't eligible for another mobility device within, unless there's extenuating circumstances within that 5-year time frame.
That's a good
So if you have
consideration.
somebody, right. So if you have somebody who has Parkinson's or somebody who has dementia, like we don't want to look at exactly what they look like today. We have to think what could occur in the next couple of years and what that might look like, and get those features now, because we need to cover our bases. We don't want them to have a chair for a couple of months and now their family has to do a GoFundMe because the chair is totally inappropriate for them.
Right. I think sometimes, in my experience, one of the considerations, community. So if you're going to use your chair and go out and live your active seated life out in the community, there are so many considerations that you don't think of. Getting it into a car or a van, getting yourself into the car or van. So anything to share on community barriers or considerations?
So sure. And again, it's going to depend. So you might have somebody who needs something like a Tilton Space, for instance. Now, whether we made it or another, most Tilton Space devices are heavy, and they're not something you're going to get in most cars, right, into a vehicle. So in those lines, that's where you're going to probably need a transport chair as well, like to get to appointments or whatever, unless you have a van or you're taking accessible transportation. So that's one thing to think about. But I would never say sacrifice something that you really need for comfort and for your home. Like as long as your home can accommodate your chair for positioning, if you really need something for positioning and comfort, you want to get that. And then I just lost my earring. You want to get that for at home. And then like for transportation purposes, again, if you don't have the like a vehicle that can accommodate that, that might be where you'd want a secondary, like a transport kind of chair. But right, you want to measure your doorways. You want to make sure before someone takes, and that's another mistake a lot of times that occurs. We're not looking at the whole picture, right? We have to make sure the chair can be in the space that that person lives in. And a lot of times that has been the stumbling block for actually having power mobility, right? So if somebody lives like where there might not be an elevator, I've seen this happen many times. The person gets on board, they're so excited, they want you, but then how are they getting the chair home and where are they going with it, right? So that's always a consideration. And how active are they in the community and what do they need to do with their chair? Like that's all part of the patient's goals. And that should be one of the first things that we address with our clients is, you know, what they want to do, what their expectations are and what their goals are with their seating system. Because it's not a chair, it should be a system. It should be a seating system, especially if they're going to spend, you know, hours a day in a device.
And weather conditions, you know,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
if everything is a dark color and you're out in the heat, and I mean, there's so many things to consider when you're looking at all the possibilities. And like you said, possibilities for years to come too. There could be an instance where you want to think about that too. If I'm out and about and it starts raining,
Right.
out and
And
about and it's really sunny, or
yeah. And the other thing that is really, really important. So, especially if you have someone who does go out a lot, right? Let's say they have a chair that they do have higher positioning needs and they can get the community ride, the bus, it's like there might be a paratransit or non-emergency medical transport for that person. So really important, especially for a lot of people don't know about WC19. So that's the crash test worthiness of a chair. So if you do go out a lot and you are using paratransit, it's vital to have a chair that's been crash tested. So um, that's something that someone really should consider. Like I think about patients, especially those that like might go to dialysis 3 times a week, or maybe they're going for some other type of treatment where weekly they're going. Not only is it uncomfortable to try to sit in like a sling seat kind of situation to a medical appointment and back, right? It's also dangerous if you're sitting in a seat that is not WC19, like it's not crash worthy because, you know, if you can't transfer, I mean, ideally, being able to transfer into a vehicle's restraint system itself is the way to go but if you have to use your chair as a seat in a motor vehicle, you really should have
you taught me
WC19.
something I never considered that.
Yes, it's really, really important. Do you know if you're sitting in a wheelchair in a vehicle, you are 45 times more likely to get injured severely than someone sitting in the occupant restraint system. So that's another big important consideration.
For sure. And then you've touched on a little the mobility, just getting to do the things that they love, but being able to get to a table, get to the activities that I enjoy. There's so many considerations there for the height and
Mhm.
you have these amazing armrests that are so comfy, but nothing I can't get under or into any table. That's something I've come across before. And then taking it even further to daily tasks like showering and bathing. You know, I can't take this really great chair that everybody's designed and it's awesome, maybe into the shower. So I have to consider that. And I see, or actually Broda's come a long way with, or in my experience with even shower chairs and things, but having that, if you're going through this and you are the end user or the carer for the end user, all of this is overwhelming. So I'm really hoping that identifying some of these considerations may help someone in the future to think of all the things that they can possibly think of. So getting over the thresholds. We talked about that, up to the table, and then being able to participate in preferred activities is just huge, because you said it. The goal of that end user is the utmost first question. Like, what do you want to be able to do? And maybe that changes and then we adjust, but things that are important to them should be the first consideration. So I'm glad you brought that up.
And comfort's really important. So you're not going to be able to do or participate in activities if you're not comfortable. And we've all worked, a lot of us have seen or seen pictures of people in skilled facilities where the posterior pelvic tilt, when someone's slumping kind of forward in the chair, we've seen what that posture looks like, and think about how uncomfortable that is, especially for people who cannot reposition themselves. They can't scoot themselves back and get themselves or unweight themselves, right? So that their body has time to redistribute the pressure and they're not just sitting on their tailbone all day, which is one of the number one reasons a lot of people get wounds there.
Well, now you're speaking my language, because that's why I'm here today, honestly, because that's what I love about the orbiter. Just because that is a huge consideration, and comfort, but then on top of comfort, all the things you're saying that could happen. We want to put in as much as possible.
Yep. Especially for people. So I always think most about the people that either have issues with sensation or they have mobility issues, which prevents them from being able to perform an active weight shift. Because, when we're just sitting here, like when I'm talking, I'm scooting around in my chair. Like you do something, you do it unconsciously. You don't even think about it when you're doing it. And if you think about the person who, I always call a wheelchair prison, right? If they can't move themselves, like think about how uncomfortable that must be. And that's why a lot of people can't tolerate being out of bed for more than 2 hours. If they're trying to get forced, it's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. If you're trying to force somebody in that 90-90 configuration, it's going to fail because your body's not designed that way. And most of us have lived an active life, right? So we come with some of the things that happen with an active life, right? We have old injuries. Some of us have arthritis. Like if you live long enough and you do enough, you definitely have arthritis, right? So, old football injuries, I don't know, golfer's elbow, whatever kind of things you want to talk about. But if you try to force somebody that already has some kind of contracture or some kind of tightening or shortening, I always talk about men, because men notoriously have tight hamstrings and it does not get any better when they get older. So a lot of times that is one of the culprits for posterior pelvic tilt for people that might not have anything else going on. Just might be those tight hamstrings, and your body just can't take trying to sit in that position all day. So
I think sometimes we work, let's go geriatric setting, and I'm working in a skilled nursing facility, and I have, 12 different types of chairs that I can look at. What
you're lucky if you have 12, but okay, go ahead.
Well, maybe 5, and I have to make I got to get out my wrench. I always had students, and part of their thing was take apart this chair and put it back together, because I did not know that you could do all these things to different chairs. But I also, let's say I had 5 and nothing was working. I would reach out, like you were saying, to a company that would let me trial certain things. But I also, a consideration I want to say is the trial thing is huge, but also don't ask for these elaborate things maybe all the time. That way you can get that yes for funding, because they know you're going to come to them only when you really, really need it, and maybe piece together other things. But doing that trial will help with that too, because you can prove, hey, everyone, this worked. Now let's put some funding here. But I think that's something that coming out of school, prefab was just great because, this fixes everything, but that's also expensive, and customizations are expensive. So I learned really quickly, but it took me a little bit. I don't ask for everything for everybody when I can maybe use what I have over here. And then those really tough cases, start there. Start with the tough cases. Once you prove that an amazing equipment works, then
Well, I have another thought about that. So I always
you're
talk
more apt to
about
buy it
getting
again.
administrative buy-in because I was a director of rehab for the last 10 years of my career. And so I understand the whole budget and the balance kind of thing. But I always tell therapists that they should appeal to the QAPI or that quality control effort. And then I say, just like I always said to patients, like try little changes over time. It's kind of the same thing with trying to get administrative buy-in. If you can approach your administrator and your director of nursing and be like, listen, we really need to get some better equipment here. What do you think about adding, I don't know, 6 chairs this year? And maybe if we can do it in the capital budget and start out in the beginning of the year, it's not taking such a big hit. Like, hey, we'll get chairs that are much easier to multi-purpose. So we're looking at, if you have 5 inches of adjustability, which most standard wheelchairs do not have, if you have a chair that you can go with low seat to floor height, but you can adjust up to 5 inches. So if you have, I always talk about the little petite little old lady in the chair. We're not, as we get older, we're shrinking for sure. We're not getting any taller. And a lot of times they're just getting by, especially if they foot propel. And then they need a cushion now because they're bony. Maybe they're not eating as much as they used to. And now they need a 3 inch. Most pressure redistribution cushions are at least 3 inches, right? If they're going to do anything. So we're going to put that on something they're never going to achieve heel strike. So when we're thinking about a multi-purpose, and that's the other thing you want to talk to your administrator about, listen, so if we get a chair like this, we can accommodate, we can just adjust it. You want adjustable arm rests, you want adjustable footrest, you want swing away, you want adjustable height. And like I said, if you could get something that's 5 inches, you're golden because there's so many people that's going to work for, and approach it that way. And yes, I agree. Like but I don't think you should ever shy away from asking for what your patients need. If you can make, like if I'm talking about that person that maybe just has tight hamstrings, right? That can't propel, that can't walk all day because maybe they have COPD or they have CHF and they're kind of limited. And that's what they usually use the wheelchair for. That's different. Yes, we can accommodate. There's ways to take the sling out of the seat and use different types of cushions or stuff for those people. But unfortunately, if you're in a skilled facility, that is the exception, not the rule for sure. So I really think you have to hit them in the area that they know.
Yes.
So that's usually quality, right? Because everybody's always worried about their ratings. And I've always gotten families involved with seating recommendations and stuff as well, because they can be a really good advocate for their own family member,
Yes.
And one thing a lot of people don't think about, if you're talking specifically about skilled facilities, like I said, there's a handful of states where Medicaid will still pay for custom seating in skilled facilities. And 90% of the time, I would hope 99.9% of the time, people that work in those facilities know about that and they use that, right? Because that's a great benefit. But there's also Medicaid spend down. We have a lot of patients that end up in a facility that have homes. And how many times have you heard they have a spend down, like they need to spend money down? And I have always been a big person, but wait, before you buy the big screen TV, let's get them a good wheelchair.
Yes.
So, that's another thing to think about, that sometimes people don't think about it.
You made me think of also using metrics, using fall percentages,
Oh, absolutely.
using that because I remember, and I was a rehab director and my OT was like, she needs a pedal Broda. She needs a pedal Broda. That's why she keeps falling. She's trying to get around. And she did have this lady had so many falls. We were able to get that. Of course, we trialed,
Right.
worked, and we were able to get that because that's what she specifically needed. And we used that QAPI meeting and the percentage of
Yes.
falls for that one
Yes.
person that kept staying on the list over and over. So that worked out great. And we were able to find the solution and get her off that list.
Yep. Yep. And that is it. I mean, and sometimes like I've done it, like you have to show the administrators like how much it costs to deal with one wound, especially now. with the way insurances are taking their money back. Like if we have to keep getting rehospitalized and people are acquiring wounds, we have to do better, right? We can't just go by, the old saying used to always be, well, we only have to provide a wheelchair. It's all that's medically necessary. We don't have to, but guess what? That's not really true anymore. Like if you're meeting the guidelines for quality control and for, even for omnibus, like that act, that's way, it's bringing me back flashbacks, and like all the newer regulations that have come out, that is not true anymore. That's a cop out, and that is not going to work. Go tell a state surveyor that and see what happens. That's not the answer. The answer is you have to provide the best you can to prevent, right? From prevent pressure injuries and to prevent hip fractures and to prevent, unnecessary or subdural hematomas. Like how many times have you heard somebody fall and end up, that's, it's horrible. Like who wants to be responsible for that? So I think and that's the thing too, even when it comes to cushions, because I always say, like, if administrators understood how those cheap foam cushions that bottom out like 5 minutes after you buy them, if they understood the shelf life, like if you really went by when you should dispose of them, like if as therapists, if we got rid of them when they started to smell or they had a stain or they really weren't effective, they would understand that it's really not a bargain, So if you start better, right, and you go through capital, like if you're a good director of rehab or a good therapist that can talk to your director of rehab about, like, these are the kinds of strategies that you need to use. Hey, let's buy 12 top of the line cushions this year, one a month. Right? Because then you're breaking it up over 12 months. And there's still manufacturers out there today that rent chairs too. So that's another option. If you have somebody that really needs something better, maybe we can rent it for a while and see how that goes. Right. So
and some have a rent options. Some have a rent to own option, which is wonderful for the business office. I've gone to the business office manager before, and all right, if we break it up into these 4 payments, that's going to be easier for you to get, everyone buy-in for everyone. So yeah, good points. What else do you want to share with our viewers as we're closing up?
I think we just need to do better in healthcare across the board, and seating and positioning for sure, at being preventative instead of reactive, because we're always chasing after the wound happened, after the fall happened, we need to change our mindset. And instead of being, I always said, as a director of rehab or being like a lead therapist, you were kind of like a fireman, right? Because you're always just putting out fires all day. It's exhausting. Like, let's get more of a preventive mindset. And I think if you're positive about it and you can actually show, break it down for people, like do your homework and bring that. Because I always said as a director too, don't just bring me problems, bring me solutions. You bring me solutions, then I can bring solutions, right? And that's what I used to try to do for administration too. It's like, hey, what if we do this? And I've always proposed, like, let's do it for the capital year and let's spread it out over the year. And this is, by this time next year, we could have 12 great chairs, and what a big difference that would make in 12 people's lives. And actually more, because we always have a couple of chairs that get donated that are good. And I used to always be called the Grim Reaper because I would take chair, somebody passed away and I'd be like, maybe it was a Tilton Space or whatever the chair might have been. And I'd be like, oh, but I already knew somebody waiting in the wings that could benefit from it. So
exactly. Yeah. Great points. So now I want to know, what do you do for fun when you're not always educating and working?
I make jewelry. I like silver. Silver's a little bit of an expensive habit these days. I enjoy that. I make jewelry and I hang out with my dog because my dog's he's my life. That's what happens when you don't have children.
Yeah, what's your dog's name?
Finn. Oh. My lazy coworker. He's over here right now, just laying, watching. He's not even watching me. He's kind of annoyed, I guess, that I'm not paying attention.
Yes, exactly. The attention's not on him. But thank you so much for being with us today. And I've learned a lot, and I know our viewers will, no matter where they're coming from as a viewer. I appreciate your time and your advocacy. I appreciate your education, your advocacy. You're a blessing to this field as an OTA turned OT. And I think it's wonderful. And I hope to work with you in the future. Thank you.
For sure. Great. Thanks so much, Wendy. It was a lot of fun.
What great information that was shared tonight. We want to be able to provide all of this education to you, and we also can give team in services. So maybe you want to set up an in service for you and your team. And when you learn things together and collaborate together, you tend to be able to answer more questions and provide more services to the clients that are relying on you or the patients that are relying on you. So doing things as a team is always a good idea. So we could set that up for you. Just email us at education@kalogon.com. If you want more information about the orbiter or our seating, smart seating solutions, you can email education as well, and we'll get back to you. We do have a couple questions, and I will make sure that we get those answered and emailed to you. Just a couple things that I'll follow up on and get those answers for you, and I'll be able to email those answers. So we thank you for joining us tonight and hearing all the great information from Brenda. And we hope to see you next month for Kalogon Presents. Thank you. Have a great night.